They cut our main water line. I shouted as I watched water shoot like a geyser from our front lawn. 3 men in HOA uniforms stood watching, smirking. This phase is just the beginning, the platinum-haired woman in an Armani suit said with an ice-cold voice. In 72 hours, this house won't be yours anymore. They had never sent a single violation notice before this standing in front of them. I came to this realization the dispute wasn't about HOA regulations. The affair was a conspiracy to steal our home. What they didn't know was that my wife commands a U.S. Navy destroyer with 350 sailors and an arsenal of weapons, and she'd just been granted emergency leave. I checked my phone. I've touched down. And I'm going to make them regret messing with our family. The present isn't a story. It's a war zone. And the moment she stepped off that plane, the countdown to total collapse began. Let me know in the comments. Would you stay, fight, or run? I should probably back up and explain how this nightmare began. My name is Austin Monroe. Just 3 months ago, my family and I, that's my wife Scarlett and our 9-year-old daughter Melanie, moved into what we thought was our dream home in Oak Ridge Estates, an upscale community with manicured lawns and picturesque houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. After years of military relocations following Scarlett's naval career, we finally had a place we could call our own, a forever home. As a freelance writer, I typically assume responsibility. While Scarlett serves our country, she's currently a commander in the Navy in charge of a destroyer with hundreds of sailors under her command. She's also a former civil attorney, though that part of her resume wasn't relevant until the HOA from hell decided to target us. It all started on a Tuesday morning. I was in my home office finishing an article when I heard an aggressive knock at the door. When I opened it, I found 3 people standing on my porch. 2 large men built like security guards flanked a lean, mean-looking guy in a cheap suit who introduced himself as Connor Wallace, the HOA property manager. His smile never reached his eyes as he handed me an official-looking document. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises, he announced like he was reading from a script for serious violations of the HOA regulations. I was completely blindsided. We had always been careful to follow every rule since moving in, and I made sure to confirm this fact. There must be some mistake, I said, feeling my heart rate accelerate. We've been here 3 months and haven't received a single warning or violation notice of any kind. Connor's smirk grew wider. Well, you're getting one now. In its terminal, the board has voted 72 hours. I asked to see the specific violations, but Connor refused to elaborate, only gesturing vaguely at our property and mentioning something about aesthetic standards and improper use of residential property. The document he handed me had the signature of someone named Aurora Blake, the HOA president, but listed no specific violations. The 2 larger men, clearly intending to intimidate me, moved slightly forward when I pressed for details. Look, Connor said, you can make your escape easy or hard, but if you're not out in 72 hours, we'll involve the authorities. My journalist instincts kicked in immediately. Something wasn't right. I discreetly pulled out my phone and started recording the interaction, remembering Scarlett's frequent advice about always documenting potentially problematic encounters. After they left, I immediately called Scarlett on her secure line. Despite being on active duty thousands of miles away, she was calm and tactical. Don't sign anything, she instructed. Take photos of our property from every angle. Send me the video you took and call Kayla Jensen. She's a good attorney I worked with before joining the Navy. Before hanging up, her voice softened. We're not losing our home, Austin. They picked the wrong family to mess with. I believed her, but it didn't calm the knot forming in my stomach. As I was taking photos of our perfectly maintained yard, my neighbor Theo Martinez from across the street cautiously approached. Theo was a software engineer who worked remotely and had always been friendly but somewhat reserved. I saw them at your door, he said, looking nervously over his shoulder. The HOA enforcers were involved. When I explained what happened, his face darkened. "You're not the first. The Thompson family was situated 2 blocks away, while the Williams were situated before them. Both pushed out. Suddenly, the Thompsons even had their utilities cut off and their gate padlocked when they fought back. Be careful, Austin. These people don't just make threats." That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed up researching Aurora Blake and the Oakage Estates HOA. Aurora was a retired real estate executive in her late 50s who had moved to the neighborhood 5 years ago and quickly risen to power in the association. There were whispers online and in community forums about her heavy-handed approach, but nothing that explained why she would target us so aggressively. The next morning, I decided to visit Hazel Wang, an elderly retired professor who, according to Theo, had lived in the neighborhood longer than almost anyone Hazel lived in. A modest home at the end of our street, with a garden that somehow always got exempted from the HOA's strict landscaping rules. When I explained my situation, she invited me in for tea. I wondered when they'd get around to your house. She said, her eyes sharp despite her age. "You're sitting on prime real estate. You know, your lot backs up to the community green space." She pulled out community maps and newspaper clippings she'd been collecting. "Aurora's been quietly pushing a plan to sell part of our community green space to a developer. Your house and 5 others sit at a strategic location where access roads would need to go." The pieces started falling into place. The dispute wasn't about violations, it was about getting us out so they could move forward with a development plan. As I was leaving Hazel's house, I noticed a luxury sedan slowing down near my home. Inside was an elegant older woman with perfectly styled hair, who I later learned was Luna Gallagher, the HOA vice president. She was clearly surveilling my property, not even trying to be subtle about it. When she saw me watching, she drove away quickly. Later that afternoon, I discovered through online research that Luna was a high-end real estate broker and the mother of the CEO of Gallagher Development Group, the very company rumored to be interested in our community's green space. I also found an obscure clause in the original HOA bylaws stating that any eviction decision required a public vote from the entire board, not just the president's signature. They hadn't followed their own rules. My research also uncovered something else interesting. Aurora Blake had donated heavily to several local politicians' campaigns. This explained the confidence with which she operated and her apparent immunity from oversight. I spent hours diving into property records and discovered a pattern. Over the past 3 years, homes in strategic locations had been sold under market value after their owners were mysteriously pressured to leave. These properties were purchased by different LLCs, but with some digging, I found connections leading back to Luna's son's development company. The project was bigger than just our house. It was a systematic scheme to reshape the entire neighborhood for profit. I printed everything I found and secured the documents in our safe, along with backup copies I uploaded to encrypted cloud storage. If they wanted a fight, I'd make sure we were armed with information. As evening fell, I noticed an unmarked car parked across from our house. Someone was clearly watching us. Then my email pinged an anonymous message: "For your best interest, it would be advisable to sell your house as soon as possible. This neighborhood isn't for people like you." I was frustrated now, but also more determined than ever. The situation wasn't just about us anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could steamroll an entire community. The next day, I attended the monthly HOA meeting, walking into the community center with my head held high. Despite the stares, Aurora Blake sat at the center of the board table, her platinum hair immaculate, her expression cold when she saw me. Luna Gallagher sat beside her, whispering something as I took a seat in the back. I waited patiently through the mundane agenda items until the open forum period, then stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Austin Monroe." I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 days ago, I received an eviction notice from this HOA. Without any prior warnings or citations, I'd like to know exactly what violations my family has allegedly committed. The room feels uncomfortably silent. Several homeowners turned to look at me with surprised expressions. Aurora's face remained impassive as she replied, "Mr. Monroe, individual enforcement actions aren't appropriate for public discussion. If you'd like to appeal, you can submit a written request that the board will consider at our next meeting in 30 days. Her dismissive tone made it clear she expected that to be the end of it, but I was prepared. Actually, Article 7, Section 3 of the original HOA bylaws states that the entire board must hold a public vote for any eviction decision, and specific violations must be cited in the public record. That doesn't appear to have happened in my case." The color drained from Aurora's face for just a second before she regained her composure. Luna jumped in. "Seems Mr. Monroe may not be fully familiar with our updated procedures." She turned to a digital projector and suddenly displayed photos of my house, photos that had clearly been altered to show peeling paint, overgrown landscaping, and what appeared to be commercial equipment in our garage. None of it was real. I pulled out my phone and accessed the photos I'd taken yesterday. I'd be pleased to show current, unedited photos of my property to anyone interested. I offered, connecting my phone to the projector before anyone could object. The contrast was stark. Our house was immaculate. I proceeded further. "While we're discussing transparency, I'd also like to ask about the proposed sale of community green space to Gallagher Development Group, a company run by Ms. Gallagher's son, and how that relates to the sudden interest in removing homeowners along Maple Street." The room erupted. Homeowners started shouting questions. Many homeowners were unaware that the community's most valued amenity, the green space, was potentially up for sale. A few residents stood up in my defense, noting that our property had always been well maintained. One elderly gentleman demanded to see the full financial records of the HOA, which Aurora promptly refused. The meeting descended into chaos, with Aurora banging her gavel repeatedly, finally announcing the meeting was adjourned due to disruptive behavior. However, the disruption had already occurred. As people were filling out the form, many stopped to express support or share their own stories of HOA intimidation. Some exchanged phone numbers with me, eager to form an alliance against what was clearly abusive leadership. I noticed that throughout the confrontation, one board member had remained conspicuously silent. A nervous-looking man who I later learned was Dominic Winslow, the HOA's accountant. As I was leaving, he approached me. "Meet me at Sunlight Cafe tomorrow at 3, he whispered hurriedly. "There's more to the story than you know." Before I could ask questions, he hurried away. My blood ran cold when I got home. Someone had spray-painted a large red X on our front door. The act of vandalism felt akin to an aggressive declaration. I documented everything, then spent an hour scrubbing the paint off our door. That night, I installed security cameras around our property, a precaution that would prove critical in the days ahead. The next morning, I received a formal letter from the HOA citing us for the unapproved decoration on our front door, the very X that they or their cronies had spray-painted. The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. The letter included an additional fine of $300 for the violation. I added it to my growing file of evidence of harassment. After dropping Melanie at school with warnings to stay close to her teachers and not leave with anyone but me, I spent the morning researching the legal options for fighting an HOA. Our state, the laws generally favored associations, but there were clear boundaries they couldn't cross. Aurora and her team had already crossed these boundaries. At 3:00 sharp, I arrived at Sunlight Cafe, choosing a corner table with a view of all entrances. Dominic arrived 10 minutes late, visibly nervous. He ordered coffee but barely touched it, constantly checking over his shoulder as he spoke. "I've been the HOA's accountant for 6 years." He began in a hushed voice. "At first, everything Was above board, but when Aurora took over, things changed. He slid a USB drive across the table. There's a shadow account. They've been skimming HOA fees for years, but that's just the start. They're using the money to quietly buy up properties through shell companies, then flipping them to developers at giant profits. The sums involved were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars misappropriated from community funds. When I asked why he participated, Dominic's face flushed with shame. Aurora found a mistake I made years ago. A decimal point error that accidentally benefited a client. Aurora threatened to report me to the licensing board if I didn't assist in concealing their tracks. His hands trembled slightly as he continued, but the real money is in this development deal. It's worth millions. The green space is the last large undeveloped parcel in this zip code. Luna's son has investors lined up to build luxury condos, but they need access through your street. I asked why. He was coming forward now after years of complicity, because they're not just bending rules anymore, they're breaking laws. They are engaging in activities such as forging documents, intimidating others, and committing acts of vandalism. Someone is bound to suffer harm. As he stood to leave, he added, "Be careful. The police fired Connor for using excessive force. He's dangerous, especially now that he owes money to some bad people, Aurora's, giving him one last chance to prove himself useful." With that warning, he departed, leaving me with a wealth of incriminating financial records and a growing sense that we were dealing with something far more dangerous than typical HOA pettiness. Later that day, I met with Kayla Jensen at her downtown law office. She was a straight-talking attorney in her late 40s with a reputation for taking on powerful interests. After reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, including Dominic's financial documents, she was blunt. "You've got something solid here, Austin. Financial fraud conspiracy to deprive homeowners of property rights and possible racketeering, but they're going to escalate before they back down." She advised me to keep gathering evidence, to maintain detailed records of every interaction, and to secure our home with additional cameras and locks, and be prepared for things to get worse before they get better. These types are used to get in their way. When they feel cornered, they lash out. She agreed to represent us and immediately filed for an emergency injunction against the HOA's eviction attempt, citing procedural violations and evidence of bad faith actions. Kayla's warning proved prophetic. That evening, I noticed Connor and his security team patrolling in front of our house. I ordered pizza for dinner. They followed the delivery driver to our door, intimidating him with questions and photographing his vehicle. Our neighbors began avoiding us, clearly scared of being associated with the HOA's newest targets. Melanie came home from school in tears, telling me that a classmate had said we were criminals who were stealing from the neighborhood. The psychological warfare was affecting all of us. After putting Melanie to bed, I called Theo to ask if she could stay with his family temporarily. He agreed immediately, understanding the potential danger. "My wife can take her to and from school with our kids," he offered, "at least until your wife gets back." I gratefully accepted, packing an overnight bag for Melanie with her favorite stuffed animals and books. That night, Scarlett called with good news. She'd secured emergency leave from her deployment. I presented the evidence to my commanding officer. She explained the illegal threats against a military family, the potential financial crimes, and the harassment of a dependent while I'm on active duty were enough to grant me emergency leave. "I'll be home tomorrow morning." Her voice carried an edge I recognized from previous crises. Her voice was focused, determined, and ready for battle. "Just hold the fort one more night, Austin. I'm bringing reinforcements." I felt a wave of relief knowing Scarlett was coming home. She had a way of cutting through chaos and creating order that had served her well in her military career. If anyone could handle this situation, it was her. But my relief was short-lived. I heard a noise outside just after midnight and discovered that someone had vandalized all our security cameras. Hours later, our water and electricity were suddenly Cut off, I sat in our dark house packing essentials by flashlight, grimly amused by the timing. This action was taken prior to Scarlett's arrival. It was a clear message that they had control over even our basic utilities. What they didn't realize was that every escalation only strengthened our case and our resolve. I moved methodically through the darkness, securing important documents and preparing to pick up Scarlett from the airport at dawn. Before leaving, I set up my laptop with its battery backup to record any intrusions. They have no idea who they're messing with, I muttered, thinking not just of Scarlett's military authority, but of our combined determination to protect what was ours. This case wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about standing up to corruption and intimidation that had poisoned an entire community. Scarlett arrived on the 6:00 a.m. flight, wearing her full Navy commander uniform. Her posture erect, her eyes alert despite the long journey. The moment I saw her striding through the terminal, sense of calm washed over me. She had always been my anchor, the steady force in our family's life. Watching her navigate through the crowded airport, her shoulders squared, her chin up, her uniform crisp and perfectly arranged, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her 15 years ago. She exuded a quiet confidence that straightened everyone around her. Even exhausted from a 30-hour journey that had taken her from the Mediterranean across multiple time zones, she radiated competence and determination. When our eyes met, her face broke into the warm smile reserved just for family, and I felt the knot in my stomach loosen for the first time in days. We embraced tightly, the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the starchiness of her uniform, bringing a wave of emotion I hadn't expected. "I missed you," I whispered suddenly, aware of how isolated I'd felt facing this battle alone. She pulled back slightly, her hand still on my shoulders, and looked me squarely in the eyes. "I missed you too. Please share all the details with me, ensuring nothing is left out." As we strolled towards the car, I updated her on the most recent advancements. Her expression grew increasingly focused, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes on her phone. This was Scarlett in tactical mode, absorbing information, searching for patterns, and identifying leverage points. By the time we reached the parking garage, she was already formulating strategies. As we loaded her duffel bag into the trunk, she stated that we must first document the utility disruption and immediately restore it. Then we need to consolidate our evidence, expand our community allies, and prepare for their next move. She paused, her expression hardening. "They've crossed several legal lines already. That gives us options." As we drove home, neighbors peeked from behind curtains, clearly surprised by the sight of a naval officer in full uniform exiting our car, bringing out the big guns. I said, gesturing to her uniform. Scarlett's smile was piercing. "When you're heading into battle, you wear your armor. The uniform serves multiple purposes: psychological impact, institutional authority, and a reminder that they're not just dealing with homeowners anymore. They're dealing with the United States Navy." There was a strategic purposefulness to her arrival in uniform that I hadn't immediately grasped. It was her opening move in a psychological operation against our opponents inside our powerless house. Scarlett immediately went into command mode. She walked through each room methodically, assessing the security of the property, examining the vandalized cameras, testing the water and electrical systems, and reviewing the timeline I documented. She took dozens of photos, paying particular attention to signs of tampering with our utilities. "Such behavior is textbook intimidation," she said, kneeling to examine our electrical panel. "They've deliberately targeted critical infrastructure, attempting to make the property uninhabitable without a formal eviction process." Her analytical approach turned our personal crisis into a tactical problem that needed solving. It was impressive to watch her work. She devoted all her skills, which had elevated her to command a naval destroyer, to safeguarding our home. After completing her assessment, Scarlett spread all our evidence across the Dining room table. The evidence included photos, documents, timelines, financial records, HOA bylaws, community maps, property records, and Dominic's USB drive. She studied everything meticulously, occasionally asking me to clarify details or provide context. Problem isn't just an HOA dispute, she concluded after an hour. It's organized corruption with elements of racketeering and conspiracy. We need to attack the problem on multiple fronts simultaneously. She created a detailed action plan assigning priorities and timelines to each task. The first task was to restore our utilities, followed by securing legal protection, building community resistance, and finally exposing the entire scheme to regulatory authorities. They're not used to organized opposition, she explained. They expect isolated homeowners to get up when threatened. We're going to show them what happens when they target the wrong family. Her tactical mind immediately went to work implementing our counteroffensive. After a complete assessment of our situation, she made 3 strategic phone calls that would dramatically change the course of our battle. The first was to the city utilities director, a fellow veteran she'd worked with during a previous hurricane relief effort. Her approach was respectful but firm. Our utilities had been illegally disconnected without the legally required 30-day notice. Clear violation of state law, regardless of any HOA disputes. She detailed the timeline, provided photographic evidence, and cited the relevant statutes. She didn't need to mention her military status directly. It was evident in her voice, her bearing, and of course, her email signature with her full rank and title. Within hours, utility crew arrived to restore our water and electricity, apologizing for the misunderstanding. The crew chief discreetly revealed to us that the person who ordered the disconnection had blatantly lied about our houses. Abandonment. What was particularly effective about Scarlett's approach was the way she framed each conversation. Not as a personal problem, but as a systemic issue requiring institutional attention. She spoke the language of professionals, clear, factual, and focused on regulatory compliance rather than emotional appeals. When speaking with the utilities director, she emphasized the potential liability the city faced if they were found complicit in an improper disconnection. The situation isn't just about our inconvenience, she explained. She stressed the importance of following proper procedures for all residents. This approach, elevating personal issues to matters of public policy, was something she'd perfected during her naval career, where individual concerns always had to be balanced against broader operational objectives. The second call was to her contact at the local newspaper, a reporter who specialized in government accountability rather than presenting our situation as a personal grievance. Scarlett framed it as a story about systematic corruption affecting an entire community with documentation to support every claim. She offered exclusive access to financial records showing misappropriation of HOA funds, evidence of selective enforcement of rules, and testimony from multiple homeowners about intimidation tactics. The reporter, sensing a major investigative piece, agreed to meet with us that afternoon. The third call was to the Federal Housing Authority, where she spoke with an investigator about potential violations of fair housing laws. She presented a compelling case that the HOA was engaging in discriminatory practices designed to remove certain homeowners for financial gain. This federal angle was strategically crucial. It elevated the situation beyond local politics and introduced the possibility of federal oversight. With our basic services restored and critical allies engaged, Scarlett turned her attention to what she called our community outreach phase. She changed from her formal uniform into business casual attire, explaining, "We've made our first impression. Now we need to be accessible." We spent the day systematically visiting neighbors, sharing what we'd learned about the development plan that would impact everyone's property values and quality of life. Scarlett's approach was masterful. She listened more than she spoke, found common ground with each neighbor, and framed the issue as a community concern rather than our personal problem. At first, many neighbors were reluctant to engage in conversation, but her assured and direct approach facilitated communication. "We're not just fighting for our home," she explained to each neighbor. "We're fighting for the integrity of this entire community." By mid-afternoon, we'd formed a core group of allies committed to opposing Oraro's regime. What struck me most during these visits was how many of our neighbors had their stories of intimidation and unfair treatment, but had been too afraid to speak up individually. The previous board had repeatedly fined one family for having a basketball hoop. Despite state laws protecting such installations, another family had denied permission to install solar panels. A retired couple faced harassment due to their grandchildren's frequent visits. Each story reinforced our understanding that Oraro's regime operated through isolation and fear, keeping homeowners from realizing they weren't alone in their experiences. Scarlett systematically broke down these barriers, creating a communication network among previously isolated neighbors. She understood something fundamental about community organizing. People who feel alone rarely fight back, but individuals who feel connected become formidable. Scarlett also took time to video call with Melanie at Theo's house, reassuring our daughter that everything would be okay. "Remember what I always tell you about bullies?" she asked. Melanie nodded solemnly. "They only have the power you give them." They recited together a family mantra that now carried new significance. Scarlett promised to pick her up the next day. "Once we had secured the house, I need you to be brave for one more night. Sweetheart, Dad and I are fixing things." After the call, I saw a momentary flash of vulnerability in Scarlett's eyes. The mother worried about her child's sense of security, but it vanished quickly, replaced by renewed determination. She quietly stated that the situation would conclude tomorrow, regardless of the outcome. By evening, a certified letter arrived from the HOA stating that they would be proceeding with property seizure in 48 hours, citing a clause in the HOA covenant that even Kayla had never seen before, claiming expansive powers to protect community interests through expedited property reclamation. Scarlett merely raised an eyebrow as she read it. She said almost approvingly that everything was right on schedule. "They're predictable, at least." She added the letter to our evidence file, noting the timing right after we'd begun mobilizing community opposition. As darkness fell, we spotted Connor and his security team setting up temporary fencing around our property line. A clear escalation meant to intimidate us and signal to neighbors that our fate was sealed. They worked under floodlights, making no attempt to be subtle. Scarlett watched them through binoculars, her expression calculating. "You know, Austin," she said with a determined smile, "after 4 combat deployments, I've learned one thing. Enemies always make mistakes when they're feeling most confident." We spent that night strategizing using Scarlett's military experience in unexpected ways. She drew up what looked like battle plans, flow charts of authority, chains of communication, and contingency scenarios. "In the Navy, we call this force multiplication," she explained. "When you're outgunned, Ned, you use every resource and advantage available to create the impression of greater strength." By dawn, we had a comprehensive plan she called Operation Transparency, designed to mobilize on multiple fronts simultaneously. The next morning, our counter-offensive began. First, we hosted an impromptu community meeting at Theo's house, where Scarlett presented evidence of the shadow financial accounts and the development plans that would affect everyone's property values. Her presentation was clear, factual, and compelling skills honed through years of military briefings. "This isn't about politics or personalities," she emphasized. "It's about lawful governance and protecting our shared investment in this community." Meanwhile, the local newspaper ran a front-page story titled "HOA Dictatorship Corruption Allegations Rock Oak Ridge Estates," featuring interviews with multiple residents, documents we'd provided, and photos of the temporary Fencing around our property, the reporter had done additional digging, uncovering links between Aurora's previous business ventures and several failed development projects that had left investors in financial ruin. The story raised questions about how someone with her history had gained control of an HOA, managing millions in assets. Aurora and Luna scrambled to contain the damage, hastily calling a press conference where they dismissed all allegations as disgruntled homeowner conspiracy theories and threatened legal action against the newspaper. But their defensive posture only lent credibility to the accusations. The momentum had shifted dramatically. Scarlett had also filed formal complaints with the Federal Housing Authority, requesting an investigation into financial improprieties and potential violations of fair housing laws. She specifically cited the pattern of targeting homeowners who opposed the development plan or questioned HOA governance. This federal angle added significant pressure as FHA investigations carried the possibility of serious penalties, including criminal charges for wire fraud and misappropriation of funds. More residents began contacting us, sharing their stories of intimidation and demanding an independent audit of the HOA's books. What had begun as an attack on our family had blossomed into a full community uprising against years of abusive leadership. That evening, a formal letter arrived from Aurora, offering a settlement. We could remain in our home if we signed a non-disclosure agreement and agreed to sell within 6 months at a fair market value to be determined by an appraiser of the HOA's choosing. The transparent attempt to silence us while still achieving their goal of acquiring our property was almost laughable. Scarlett responded by sending a detailed complaint to the district attorney's office, copying the state attorney general's Consumer Protection Division. We later learned through Dominic that Aurora was getting desperate. He'd overheard Connor in her office, ordering him to solve the problem by any means necessary and promising to clear his gambling debts and secure him a position in the new development company if he succeeded. Connor, who was facing bankruptcy and threats from loan sharks, saw no choice but to comply with Aurora's demands. The night before the HOA's ultimatum expired, we prepared for what Scarlett called the culmination phase. We had secured our most important possessions off-site, reinforced our doors, and established a phone tree with supportive neighbors who would respond immediately to any disturbance. I spotted Connor and his team reconnoitering our property, clearly planning to change our locks the next morning. Scarlett had anticipated this. "Let them make their move," she said calmly. "We've set the trap, now we wait for them to walk into it." While Scarlett fine-tuned what she called our tactical response, I worked with Hazel to uncover one final decisive piece of evidence. There was documentation proving that Aurora had forged the signatures of board members on multiple critical decisions over the years. Hazel had been quietly collecting evidence for years, waiting for someone willing to take a stand. The morning of the eviction day arrived with a clear and bright sky. The weather was ironically perfect for what would turn out to be the most dramatic confrontation in Oakage Estates history. We were ready before sunrise, with Kayla on standby, and the local news was tipped off about a potential community interest story unfolding. Everything proceeded exactly as Scarlett had predicted. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Aurora and Luna arrived personally to supervise. As Connor and his team approached our house with new locks and chains, they seemed momentarily taken aback to find me calmly sitting on the front porch drinking coffee with several neighbors casually gathered on the sidewalk, ostensibly having morning conversations, but actually serving as witnesses. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "Beautiful day for some light breaking and entering, isn't it?" Aurora's eyes narrowed. "The Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association is reclaiming this property due to multiple code violations. We kindly request that you vacate immediately to avoid any further action." I checked my watch. "You might want to hold off on that." Immediately, 3 vehicles arrived. Scarlett dressed in her full commander's uniform, a reporter from the local paper and an attorney from the Federal Housing Authority. What happened next was a masterclass in calculated confrontation. As cameras rolled, Aurora ordered Connor to proceed with changing the locks. Scarlett stepped forward, presenting court documents and emergency injunction against the HOA's actions and evidence of their financial misconduct. Miss Blake, you're currently being recorded attempting to carry out an illegal eviction. Scarlett stated, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding warships. Additionally, we have evidence of forged documents, misappropriated HOA funds, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Aurora's face contorted with rage. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she hissed. I have connections in this town that can crush you. As if on cue, Luna tried to slip away to her car, but found herself blocked by a group of neighbors led by Hazel, the Federal Housing Authority attorney, was documenting everything. While the reporter was live streaming the confrontation, Aurora made a fatal mistake in her rage. Aurora turned to Connor and sternly instructed him to destroy their evidence, no matter the cost. Connor hesitated, clearly feeling uneasy about stepping over this boundary in the presence of witnesses. Aurora had called the police to the scene, expecting them to assist with the eviction, but now they found themselves investigating potential criminal actions by the HOA leadership instead. You set this up, Aurora realized, glaring at Scarlett. This entire confrontation has been set up. Scarlett simply nodded. In naval strategy, we call it controlled escalation. You create a situation where your opponent has no suitable options left. As the police began taking statements, Aurora threatened to use her political connections to destroy us. Scarlett's eyes gleamed. The most amusing part, Ms. Blake, she said calmly, is that my unit specializes in counterintelligence tactics, and you've just done exactly what we predicted you would. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. An emergency HOA meeting was called the following week, with almost every homeowner in attendance. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Scarlett methodically presented the evidence: forged documents, misappropriated funds, the secret development plans, and the systematic targeting of homeowners who stood in the way. She had organized everything into a clear, compelling narrative supported by documents, financial records, and witness statements. Aurora tried to refute everything, blaming Connor and Dominic for any irregularities, but her credibility crumbled when Scarlett revealed that Aurora had a sealed record for real estate fraud from 15 years earlier, information Hazel had uncovered through her academic connections. The room erupted in anger. Luna tried to leave, but was confronted by frustrated homeowners demanding answers about her son's development company and the apparent conflict of interest in her HOA leadership role. The police and Federal Housing Authority investigation confirmed what we'd uncovered. Nearly $200,000 in HOA funds had been diverted to shell companies controlled by Aurora and Luna over the past 3 years. The vote to remove Aurora and Luna from the board was unanimous, a moment of community solidarity that brought tears to the eyes of some longtime residents who had suffered under their regime. Connor, facing his own legal troubles, had turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency, revealing the full extent of their scheme, including plans to continue acquiring properties through intimidation tactics. Dominic, who we discovered had actually been quietly documenting the corruption for years, while appearing to be intimidated, provided crucial financial records that completed the picture of fraud and mismanagement. The community rallied around a complete restructuring of the HOA, with Theo elected as the new president and Hazel as senior advisor. Their first official act was to create a transparency committee that would ensure all financial records and board decisions were accessible to every homeowner. We scrapped the development plan that would have destroyed the green space and instead designated the area as a permanent protected community park. Our house and our community were saved. Through collective action and determination, Aurora, Luna, and Connor faced different consequences for their roles in the scheme. Aurora was heavily fined and banned from serving on any HOA board in the state, a significant blow to someone who had used the position to rebuild her power after previous scandals. Luna lost her real estate license when the state licensing board found she had violated multiple ethical standards by using her HOA position for personal gain. Connor received probation for his role in the scheme in exchange for his cooperation with authorities investigating other criminal activities connected to the HOA. Months would pass during the legal proceedings, but we had neutralized the immediate threat to our community. 6 months later, our community had transformed monthly HOA meetings, once dreaded affairs, dominated by Aurora's arbitrary rulings, became collaborative community gatherings focused on genuine improvements to the neighborhood. New bylaws which required a supermajority vote of all homeowners to modify officially protected the community green space, making it untouchable. I channeled my experience into writing a book about HOA abuse and community activism that became a local bestseller, then gained national attention when several similar cases came to light across the country. News, programs, and podcasts featured it, igniting nationwide investigations into HOA overreach. A national cable network even produced a special report inspired by our family story, highlighting the vulnerability of homeowners to corrupt association leadership. My book Battleground: How One Military Family Fought Back Against HOA Corruption became something of a handbook for homeowners facing similar situations across the country. The publisher initially expected modest sales, but as news of our story spread through social media and homeowner forums, demand surged. I started receiving emails and messages from people sharing their own HOA horror stories, many thanking us for providing both inspiration and practical strategies for fighting back. Several local lawmakers reached out to discuss potential legislative reforms, using our case as an example of the need for greater oversight of homeowner associations. What had begun as a personal fight had evolved into something much larger, a movement to address a widespread but often overlooked form of institutional abuse affecting millions of American homeowners. Scarlett received a promotion and commendation for her successful campaign to protect civilian rights with her commanding officers, noting that her tactical thinking in non-combat situations demonstrated exceptional leadership qualities. Her actions had also inspired a military support initiative to better protect service members' families from predatory practices while they were deployed. Our family hosted a community barbecue to celebrate our victory and strengthen neighborhood bonds, an event that has since become an annual tradition in Oakage Estates. What once had been a collection of isolated households afraid to challenge authority had become a tight-knit community where people looked out for one another. The experience taught us powerful lessons about community solidarity and the importance of standing up to bullies, no matter how powerful they seem. We discovered that corruption thrives in shadows and silence, but rarely survives exposure to light and truth. When Scarlett received new deployment orders, our family faced the separation with a different perspective. Are we going to have to leave our house? Meline asked one evening, voicing the fear that had become familiar during years of military relocations. Scarlett smiled, kneeling to meet our daughter's eyes. Never, sweetheart. A commander never abandons her ship, and this is our harbor. As I watched them embrace, I reflected on how what had started as a nightmare had ultimately strengthened not just our family, but an entire community. Sometimes it takes a storm to reveal what's truly solid and who's really with you when the wind blows hardest. The story of how we defeated a corrupt HOA spread further than we could have imagined. Homeowners from across the country began contacting us, sharing similar experiences and asking for advice. Scarlett and I found ourselves accidental activists speaking at community forums about standing up to institutional bullying. Local laws underwent significant changes mandating increased transparency and accountability for homeowners associations. The state legislature used our case as an example when passing new regulations governing HOA powers and procedures. The green space behind our house is now protected as a permanent nature preserve, a daily reminder that when ordinary people stand together, even the most entrenched power structures can be transformed. Dominic, once trapped by fear and manipulation, has become an advocate for financial transparency in community associations, providing expert testimony in similar cases around the state. Theo has proven to be an exceptional HOA president, focusing on genuine community needs rather than petty rule enforcement, and Hazel, whose quiet resistance and meticulous record-keeping provided the foundation for our victory, has become something of a local legend, proof that patience and persistence can ultimately triumph over corruption. Whenever I see a moving truck bringing new neighbors to our community, I make a point of being the first to welcome them, just as Theo once cautiously approached me with a warning that changed everything. Sometimes we don't fight the most important battle with weapons or in distant lands. Sometimes you fight it right in your own backyard with documents and determination. When enough individuals muster the courage to unite against injustice, they can defeat even the most formidable adversaries.